we use these things, these justifications, these rationalizations to kind of numb our sense of right and wrong, to numb our sense of empathy, to numb our sense of humanity, so that, we can stand behind our tribe and not have a guilty conscience about supporting them for doing some really bad things.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Emotions, where we explore research, ideas, and practice on emotional wellness. This podcast is intended for teens, young adults, and the adults that support them. We'll cover various topics and connect them to emotions with the aim of improving our emotional lives. Today's key idea is tribalism and connecting with others. So, with that being said, we have with us today Dr. John Cottone. How you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about being with you.
Yeah, me too. This is a topic that I've always really wanted to talk about, so I'm really excited that we can kind of like dive in and talking about this. It's an interesting time for lots of different reasons to talk about tribalism and how that connects. So we won't dive into politics too much. We won't dive into specifics and things, but we'll talk just broad strokes about how this can kind of be useful to help people live a well life. Sound good?
That sounds great. Yeah, you're right. This is a sensitive time. It's a very emotionally charged time, and
Hmm.
tribalism is playing a strong role in that. So I guess it's as good a time as any
Yep.
to be talking about
And
this stuff.
I was like, you could argue it'd be the best time to talk about stuff like this.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, let me introduce you real quick. Dr. Catone is a psychologist in private practice and a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry with the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook University. His research on psychotherapy outcomes, executive functioning, and the neurological correlates of schizophrenia have been published in acclaimed peer-reviewed journals, including the Archives of General Psychiatry, Psychotherapy, and the Journal for Scientific Study of Religion. He has a YouTube channel called MindCube 3D. He has contributed to numerous articles, numerous publications like Psychology Today, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and is the author of several books. Just to name a few: Who Are You? Essential Questions for the Hitchhikers on the Road to Truth, and Z-Score, How a Statistic Used in Psychology Will Revolutionize Baseball. I'm super curious about that one because Moneyball was a great movie. And is there any connection to that? Do you talk about that?
Well, Moneyball is was one of the inspirations behind the analyses that I did.
Mm,
So yeah, I use Billy Beane and how he revolutionized baseball as kind of the impetus and starting off point for re-examining baseball statistics using this
mhm,
standardized statistics that psychologists and scientists use a lot, called the
mhm,
Z-score, which is
mhm,
related to a percentile.
mhm.
So maybe that'll be another discussion for another day.
Hey, that'd be cool to have you back on. I think, because we're talking about tribalism, I find myself kind of like taking a step back and saying, you have a lot of different research interests. We're talking about tribalism today, but then you explored things from psychotherapy outcomes to talking about statistics in baseball, and then also schizophrenia. Like your interests kind of have taken you in different areas.
Thank you. Yeah, I was a baseball player in college. I actually played all four sports in high school, but I was best at baseball. I got a college scholarship, so I was always very interested in baseball. But I knew from when I was about 14 or 15 that I wanted to be a psychologist. And so I knew that my career in baseball probably wasn't going to last beyond my college days. But it was really interesting and fun to do that book because it combined two of the things that I was best at, that I knew best, which was psychology and baseball. So that was kind of a labor of love, and it was fun to do. And I gave a talk at the Baseball Hall of Fame on that book, which was an honor and, a lot of fun as well.
I can imagine that had to be like a pretty huge pinnacle in the professional, but also like the personal career to like be like, oh, Baseball Hall of Fame? Yes.
That's right. Yeah, I was never going to make it there based on my baseball talents, but just to be able to give a talk there on, something that I did professionally was, one of the highlights of my career. Absolutely.
That's cool. Well, maybe I'll kind of turn us a little bit to talking about the topic of tribalism. What brought you into exploring that topic at all?
Yeah, I think you touched on it earlier, which is that the sort of cultural and political moment that we're in, I mean, we tend to think of it as just lasting right now, but this
Hmm.
has really been going on for forever. I guess in the words of Billy Joel, we didn't start the fire. It's always been turning. It's always been burning since the world's been turning. But it seems to increasingly intensify as time goes on, and certainly in the last 5, 10, 15 years, however long you want to think about it, it seems to be coming to more of an acute focus and intensity. And I'm in a number of different circles. I'm in circles with academics, I'm in circles with psychologists,
Hmm.
I'm in circles with scientists, but I'm also in circles with police officers and firefighters and blue collar workers. And so, as you could imagine, their perspectives on the world and their politics are very different.
Hmm.
Um, just taking a step outside of politics for a second, I was raised a Catholic, um, but at a certain point began seeing certain issues within Catholicism that were troubling for me, even though I sort of bought into the larger Christian message and the larger teachings of Jesus. I saw certain things that I disagreed with, and I wasn't happy with how the Catholic Church was dealing with some of those issues. So I sort of split off myself from the tribe of the Catholic Church, but
Hmm.
I maintained a lot of the beliefs and the philosophies of Catholicism or Christianity more broadly.
Hmm.
Um, when I met my wife in graduate school at Stony Brook, and she was Jewish, and so she came from a very different tribe. And she went through a similar sort of critique of her own religious tribe of Judaism. And so I was talking to a friend about this recently that, we both were sort of coming into this relationship from different tribes, from different religious backgrounds, but
Hmm.
we both sort of had a critical view of our own tribe, or our own religious tribe at least. And I think, the genesis of this article kind of comes from many different places, but one of which is this relationship and this marriage that I have with my wife of 20, it'll be 23 years in May. Um, and so I think if each of us was so beholden to the tribes of our upbringing, then we probably wouldn't have married each other. But it was because
Hmm.
we had the flexibility to look outside our tribe and to think outside our tribe to find a mate, to keep our minds open to who would most stimulate us and make us happy. That's how we ended up together in the first place. So, you can see the limits of tribalism. Um, Obviously, tribalism has certain benefits, which I alluded to in the article, and in this book that I'm reading now, *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, talks about different benefits of tribalism that we can talk about later. But certainly, there are limitations and drawbacks. So, in this article, I wanted to kind of address both the benefits of tribalism and try to explain why people band together in tribes in the first place, but
Hmm.
also look at the limitations and the problems with tribalism.
Yeah. And I think that's so cool that you have this huge personal connection that kind of led you down the road of eventually writing this article. And for the people that are listening, it's Tribalism, How to Be a Part of the Solution, Not the Problem. There's also a sub headline to that, but it's a little bit longer, so I'll keep it at that. But you bring up this really great point, which is like there are benefits to it, and there's certainly a lot of limitations to it too. But your personal connection, if you hadn't had, a more critical view of the tribe that you kind of grew up in, then maybe you would have lost out on meeting your life partner. 23 years is that's a huge celebration. Like, that's a big commitment and a big accomplishment. But that ability to be able to kind of critique your own tribe led you to the possibility of encountering somebody that was outside of that. I think that's kind of poetic.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how we think about the people who are willing or interested in critiquing their own tribe.
Hmm.
So if you're a member of the tribe that's being critiqued, you look at that person as a traitor. But if you are outside of that tribe, you look at the person who's critiquing their own tribe as a truth teller, right? And so
Mm.
we see this happening politically, um, you know, some people who come to mind on both sides of the aisle, right? When John McCain was alive, right,
Hmm.
he was looked at by progressives and Democrats as being a truth teller. He had the courage to speak the truth about what was going on in the Republican Party and with Trump and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
But within the Republican Party, many Republicans, including Trump himself, saw him as not just an iconoclast, but a traitor to, the
Mm.
tribe. And the same thing has happened in recent years with, on the other side of the aisle, with people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who, from within the Democratic Party, they've tended to look at people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema as traitors or narcissists. But amongst people outside of the Democratic Party, they've looked at those people as the truth tellers, the people who are
Mm.
willing to tell the emperor he has no clothes, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So, tribalism will determine how you see some of the very same people and very same events. And there's a study that I referenced in the article. It was a study from the Yale Law Review. I think the author was Canahan, where they showed the same video to two groups of people. It was a video of
Hmm.
a protest going on at some sort of a government building. And the questions that the subjects in the study were asked were whether the protesters' actions were appropriate or whether they were over the line and the protesters should be arrested. And so, interestingly, the what determined whether the subjects agreed with the notion that the protesters' actions were appropriate were whether or not they were politically on the same side as the protesters. So, our beliefs and our tribal connections, these things are living, breathing elements of how we perceive everything that happens in front of us. They're a pair
Mm.
of sunglasses that we put on that color everything that we see.
Mm.
So,
And I like that you're highlighting this and making it very tangible for thinking about politics. But I think when you started the article, you even kind of like peel that back even more. You kind of started a much earlier phase. I'm trying to think of the line that you said. Oh, here it is. I found it. It says, "Our lives begin with our most intimate tribe, our family, whose job it is to protect and nurture us until adulthood. But then gradually, over time, we get introduced to members of other related tribes." Um, I'm fascinated by that because our first tribe is our family. And from looking at a couple of different other studies when I was doing that workshop with some middle schoolers, it that idea that like it's built on safety, it's built on
mhm.
resources, it's built on survival. I don't, what are you thinking about that? I throw a lot out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a quote from the beginning of the article. I was a fan of Game of Thrones when it was on TV,
Hmm.
and the Stark tribe, which was led at the beginning of the show by Ned Stark. There's a famous line that he says, and this I think underscores a reason why people are drawn to tribalistic connections in the first place.
Okay.
And the quote from Ned Stark is, "When the snow falls and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." Right.
Mm.
And so it's this understanding that by banding together, you can survive things that individuals would not be able to survive.
Mhm.
And in the book Sapiens that I referenced earlier, the author Harari talks about how one of the things that seems to have led to the success of our species of humans, because there were many different species of humans. We're Homo sapiens, but there was Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, and other species of humans,
Okay.
talking about 100,000 years ago. But our species of humans seems to have survived and outlived those because of our ability to band together using our skills at communication and myth making and all of those sorts of things, because some of those other species of humans were only able to band together in groups of 10 or 20, but Homo sapiens, because of their ability to communicate, because of their ability to band together around common myths or common traits, were able to exist in groups of 150 and larger.
Okay.
And so even though um, the average Neanderthal or the average, you know, individual from another human group may have been bigger and stronger than the average Homo sapien, and in a one-on-one battle, the average Neanderthal would have been able to easily defeat the average Homo sapien. When you put 150 Homo sapiens together against maybe 20 or 30 Neanderthals, well, you can overwhelm them pretty easily. And that
Right.
seems to be one of the leading theories about why our species of humans has outlived and outlasted others. So it's this ability to band together in tribes.
Mm. And I think that kind of highlights what you were saying, which is like there are tangible benefits. And that's one of them. It's like it sounds like survival is one of them. And maybe if you're in
Mhm.
competition for thing like food or shelter, water, some of those earlier, essentials that like that would be a certainly big advantage to why tribing with someone would work.
Yeah, well, I have news for you. It hasn't really changed
Hmm.
in the last 100,000 years. We're still fighting over the same resources. And, one of the other things that I noted in the article is that I think people sort of have this belief that most wars are fought over religion, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. There was an author, Hobful, who had written an article, and he was talking about how wars are always tribal. Religion is just one aspect of tribalism, but
Mhm.
um, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine and other wars and conflicts around the world, these are really battles over resources, like you were saying, water and food and arable land and things like that. And so it's survival. And I think more than anything else, you could choose to look at conflicts as being really fought over religion, but religion is just one form of tribalism. And I think the resources are really what's kind of at stake here.
Mhm. So sitting with that, I'm sitting here thinking like, oh man, all of this is about resources and about things like that. And if we kind of scale that back from like nations or,
Mhm.
huge, large swaths of a culture, and we're talking about like small groups, maybe in like schools, or maybe you're talking about like friend groups, or like, jobs, things like that. How can tribalism kind of play out in a person's day-to-day life?
Hmm. Um, so I guess you have certain cliques. If you work with high school students, you have certain cliques. Even adults have certain cliques.
Hmm.
And the teams that we root for form certain cliques. And it's interesting because like I'm here in New York, and if you're in New York, there are any number of teams that have conflicts with each other. So uh, I follow hockey very closely, so I'm a Rangers fan, and Rangers fans are uh, i- very much in a rivalry with Islanders fans. And so you've grown up, if you grow up in this area, that you'll have one group of friends who are Rangers fans and another group that either go to school with or you're friendly with outside of work or things like that. And you can have real life conflicts over what just happened in a sports game or a sporting event.
Mm.
But you can go to a Yankees game, and if they're playing the Red Sox, there'll be fights in the stands, over nothing more serious than the fact that who's winning the game, or what team you're rooting for. So these things can break down on over the most superficial of tribes or allegiances. And as you see in the work that you do with high school kids and college kids, that people will band together in tribes or cliques around various traits. Sometimes those traits are whether or not you're accepted by mainstream culture. There are certain kids in high school and college who maybe feel that because of either their sexual orientation or their sexual identity, or their interests in one particular area, or just doing well in school and being quote unquote the nerdy kid or a goth kid or whatever it may be, that they find a reason for allegiance with other people who share those traits. And that is
Mhm.
a way of forming a tribe, in some cases for psychological survival and protection, because banding together, there is support against outside forces that may be um, teasing you or bullying you, or giving you any sort of problem on any level. So
Mhm. And I was thinking about that from that workshop I did with the kids. One, I think, point that came up when you talked about the psychological was that you can get like basically like reinforced, like our brains are kind of like wired for that. Like it can trigger our reward center for being part of a group and identifying with that. Like I think of sports, like you mentioned earlier. I'm a huge Georgia Bulldogs fan. And like
uh,
like I gotta like say like the repeat, like I was on cloud nine, but because like I don't play Georgia football, like I never played football in high school or college, but because I identify with that group, like I have, because that group was doing well, I get these
yeah,
intangible benefits that actually are really felt psychologically for me. I'm
yeah.
always fascinated by that. So like when I was talking with the kids, we were highlighting that that happens. And I think, sports is a really easy way to kind of explain that. But then you were talking about, different little clicks and stuff like that too. I imagine like you could name a way that you split that apple and you can find a way to find an identification with a group.
hmm Yeah, it's really interesting. So you were talking about, being a Georgia Bulldogs fan, and college sports. It's really interesting because it's a connection and a tribe that is formed by, where you went to school, or maybe what university was closest to where you grew up, or something
Hmm,
like that.
good point.
But all across the country, it's interesting. And here's one of the other, benefits of tribalism, is that you can identify other members of your tribe in far off and distant places. And when you do, you feel a sense of connection, even though you've never
Mm-hmm.
met the person before. So,
Mm-hmm.
in every major city, there are alumni of all of the big schools across the country, and they have bars that cater to, that particular team. So if you're a Georgia Bulldogs fan, here in New York City, there are a number of bars that are, Georgia Bulldog bars where you could go on a Saturday afternoon in the fall, and they'll have the, Georgia Bulldogs game, and most of the people in the bar are, Georgia Bulldogs
Hmm.
alumni or fans or something like that. And, you were saying previously you've only been to New York once. If you come to New York again, you could find one of those bars and you'll have instant kinship with
Hmm.
people you've never met before. And
Hmm.
you'll have this shared history that you can relate to on, the history of the Georgia Bulldogs, the ups and the downs, the two-time defending champion, um, seasons, and then the losses to Alabama and Clemson, and
You
the
had to throw
shared
those back out.
heartache.
You had to throw those back out. No,
And
you're
most
fine.
recently Notre Dame. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, real quick, my son goes to Indiana, and Indiana is usually known as a basketball school, but this year they had the best football season in their history,
Yeah,
and
they
they
did.
made the college football playoffs, but they lost to Notre Dame, who also eliminated Georgia. I was hoping that Georgia was going to beat Notre Dame, but didn't happen.
It in a life full of sports fandom, I think disappointment is something you just have to live with. So I imagine we all have our ghosts.
Yeah.
I'll try to find commonality and get outside of my bias and say like we all experience that. That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Um, are there other interesting benefits for tribalism? I mean, we talked about identification with groups. We talked about like being able to kind of feel positive impacts when your group does well. Survival, resources. Are there any other ones that we hadn't touched on?
Um, the strength in numbers. Um, as we were talking about before, even on a larger level than where you went to college, in religious tribes, if you are, my wife's, Jewish, um, you know, from a statistical perspective, Jews comprise a very small percentage of the population, not just in America, but
Hmm.
in all countries of the world.
Hmm.
But, she can go to, the Czech Republic, or she can go to Mexico, or anywhere else, and find that small group of people who have the same cultural history as her, and feel a sense of kinship, just like you
Hmm.
might, going to a Georgia bar to watch a game. And but also, a shared experience of what it means to be a Jew in the world in general, and particularly in today's world.
Hmm.
And so it's a it's something that helps you to not always feel so alone. Can help you to feel validated
Hmm.
psychologically and emotionally, especially if you're in an unfamiliar place and you don't have a lot of, friends. I have patients who, because Stony Brook caters to a large international um, cohort, and so many of the people that I work with are Stony Brook students, and they come from the four corners of the earth. But some of them are have strong religious backgrounds, and when they find a church near the university that is, the their caters to their religious background,
Right,
they
right.
feel an instant sense of connection and comfort and validation where they didn't have any before.
I mean, it certainly sounds like looking at this idea of tribalism, I think sometimes we can kind of say like, you know what, like it's all bad. Like it's the reason why like we hate each other. We
Mhm.
experience fear for people that are in different groups than us. But I think it's important. That's why I wanted to kind of get to this idea first was like, there's a lot of benefits of having this. And it almost in some sense seems like from a historical, evolutionary perspective, it might be half of the reason, if not more, why we're alive today,
Right.
because it allowed us to band together.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think it's so hard to rein in the excesses of tribalism, because it does serve so many benefits, but there
Right.
are excesses and there are problems with it. And I think that, as we were talking about before, just, as it relates to the very mundane, politics, political parties, and the politics of our day, you can see how people turn a blind eye to the excesses of their tribe
Mm,
because it causes them cognitive dissonance
mm,
to think that their tribe has done something wrong or problematic. And, in psychology, particularly in the style of psychology that I practice, which is psychodynamic psychology from the Freudian perspective,
mhm,
that tendency is a defense mechanism called denial.
mhm,
And so it's very easy if you have a strong tribalistic mindset and you feel that the tribe has given you so many benefits, you don't want to lose those benefits and you don't want
mm,
the tribe to disintegrate. And so what happens when you see that your tribe has done things that are bad things? Well, you have two choices. You could either weaken your connection to well, I guess you have a few choices. You could stand up to the tribe, but,
mhm.
from the example of John McCain and Joe Manchin, you see what happens when you stand up to your own tribe. You're cast aside as a traitor and you
Isolation
know
almost.
get ostracized.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. So that's one option. Another option is, you can just weaken your connection to the tribe, which is really what I've kind of done in my life in the various tribes that I've belonged to. I still maintain, kind of a tenuous, um, nominal connection to a number of tribes, but those connections are weakened now for me. So that's another option. But then another option is you could just totally turn away, pretend that all of those negative things that your tribe didn't happen, and stay in a state of denial. And that's an option. But if you do that, and I think many people do that,
Hmm.
they keep themselves in a bubble, a denial bubble, or an echo chamber within that bubble. And the echo chamber serves to just amplify the cultural myths and the propaganda that your tribe sort of espouses. So if you do that, that's fine. You'll be psychologically safe for a while, but then you will not be ready when things change. You're not going to understand why the world changes because you've been turning a blind eye to it, because you've been in denial of why things are different in the world. And I think that's regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on, over the last 4 to 8 years, there have been people, on both sides with the results of each of the elections, both, in 2016, then in 2020, and now in 2024. There have been a lot of people, including many friends of mine, who have been, taken aback and so surprised, and they have no idea, how this could have happened. Again, if you're in 2020, if you're a Republican, you're like, you have no idea, how Biden could have been elected. And if you're, a Democrat in 2024, you have no idea how Trump could have been elected.
Hmm.
And I think that, that sort of lack of understanding comes from a certain level of denial, um, keeping yourself in a state of denial, not looking at the world as it is, but believing the tribal myths of your particular tribe and not wanting to see any of the problems of your particular tribe. So, that that then it becomes an issue when you turn a blind eye to these things, or you remain in a state of denial. You can keep psychological safety only for too long, and then it seems like the entire world changes from out underneath your feet, and you have no idea how or why.
Mhm. And I think you talk about this a little bit too, the idea of turning the blind eye. And, historically, if we just think about, in the paper, you kind of like highlight a couple of different examples of like how that can lead to really dangerous things.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of one of the ones you were talking about in there. I think it was actually the Tuskegee experiment,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
where people kind of turned a blind eye to the treatment of, Black folks getting treatment for syphilis, and it just, like it just kind of got swept under the rug for decades. Um, that's an example, one example of the ways that the dangers of that is that, like, when there's behaviors that are happening within your group,
Mhm.
people kind of turn a blind eye because they may not identify with the things that are happening to people outside of their group.
Yeah, the signing away something is a way of minimizing the suffering that, maybe your group has led to the suffering of another group or other people. And, if we can, you know, for some tribes, it's easy to explain away uh, treatment of other people on the grounds of race or something like that.
Hmm.
In other circumstances, there are all sorts of rationalizations that come into play. One of which is historical grievance. Well, this group did this to us, so we are justified in you know taking all measures necessary to, eradicate them from existence or something like that, right?
Okay.
And certainly kind of see that on both sides of the conflict in Israel and Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
happening right now. It's,
Mm-hmm.
this grievance, stuff. And so, um, we use these things, these justifications, these rationalizations to kind of numb our sense of right and wrong, to numb our sense of empathy, to numb our sense of humanity, so that, we can stand behind our tribe and not have a guilty conscience about supporting them for doing some really bad things.
Mm. Man, it almost seems like for every group, because every group would have, transgressions or like some negative histories, like regardless of what group you identify with, it sounds like sitting with that cognitive dissonance is a part of being human, a part of just living with that. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how do you maybe set some space to sit with that or maybe to work with that? Because it seems like that could exist for almost every group.
Yeah, it's really hard to do, especially when you are dependent on the group.
Yeah.
So, there's the famous line from Upton Sinclair that it's impossible to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And, that's one aspect of this phenomenon, is that if you're dependent on someone or something, you're going to have a very hard time breaking away from that person or that group or that institution, because your survival depends on them.
Mm,
And, you know, so this type of the my hope when I'm working with people individually is not to get them to abandon all of their tribes,
mhm,
but to be mindful of their tribal connections and what the costs are of those tribal connections,
mm,
as well as, what the benefits are, which are usually more salient to them and easier for them to recognize. But what are the
mhm,
costs of the tribal benefit? And if you keep your eyes open for a long enough period of time, then these things will be clear. Now, you may still participate in your tribe, you may still be a member of your tribe, but there's a difference between whether you are a blind member of that tribe who is just going to follow orders, so to speak, versus you are a member of the tribe who is keeping his or her eyes wide open and, maybe won't revolt against the tribe, but is not going to be a full-scale supporter of everything that they do.
Mm.
And in elections, you see this, right? It's the reason why the country swings back and forth in various elections because you have people who are registered Democrats, but they become disenchanted with the things that the Democrats have done. It's certainly not the full cohort of the Democratic Party, but a certain percentage, 20%.
Mhm.
And in, certain elections, they may swing to vote for a Republican, whether it's Trump or somebody else, and vice versa. In 2020, you had the 2016, and in 2020, you had the Never Trump Republicans, right, who comprised a group of the Republican Party who weren't going to stand for what the party had become under Trump. So, that was about 20% of the Republican Party. And so, these swing members of each tribe or each group kind of go back and forth in different elections based on the events on the ground of what's happening, in the country, and they swing back and forth. And that's why politically, the country swings back and forth and elections tend to swing back and forth. So it's because of these members that, aren't going to just blindly follow their tribe. They're
Mm.
going to, call out the excesses of their tribe and maybe temporarily, vote with the other tribe. But, invariably they end up swinging back when they feel things have gotten too far in the other direction. So, within each tribe, you have the diehards, the people who are, you know, gonna die with the tribe and they're going to live and die with everything the tribe does. They're going to stay in, a bubble. They're going to stay in denial. Then you have people on the other end of the spectrum who, will stay with the tribe to the extent that it's convenient for them, as long as the tribe isn't doing too much in excess. But when they feel the tribe has done too much in excess, they're going to take a step outside the tribe. But they may still come back in, at a certain point in the future. And then you have, people in the middle who are in various stages of transition between the diehards and the swing members of the tribe. So, and that's not just with politics, that's with everything, every tribe.
Yeah, when you were saying that, I was thinking about like, man, trying to make this real for, you know, I was thinking of examples and I was thinking of just different kind of cases that I've worked with for students throughout the years. And I'm like, man, let's imagine I'm like a freshman going into college. And I'm like stepping on the campus that first day. I'm going to school out of state. There's like one kid that I know going like 20 miles down the road at like another little college. And like it's just me. I'm on my own. The moment you enter those like steps of that school, you start asking
Yeah,
yourself these questions like, like who do I connect with? How do I
yeah,
find my place? Like where am I safe? And then like instantly you're kind of drawn into this and it's like very visceral. Like who are you going to connect with? Who are the people that you're going to start
yeah,
to kind of make your community? And like that's exploring the group, the in-group, the out-group stuff. And depending on how you can identify with, there's going to be drawbacks and advantages to being in each group. I'm just wondering if you have any maybe insights that might be helpful for somebody like that, like brand new one into school or brand new into a job, or, you know, what do you think?
yeah. You bring up a great example, and my son going to college. He's at Indiana.
Okay.
He There were a couple of people from his high school, maybe three or four people from his high school that went to Indiana. And even though he wasn't like the closest of friends with them when he lived here, when they were all freshmen in Indiana together, they formed a bond around being from,
Mm-hmm.
our hometown.
Yeah.
And it leads you to maybe overlook small things that maybe you didn't like about that person for the benefit of companionship, for the benefit of solidarity,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And then gradually, for him, and I think for a lot of college freshmen, the longer you spend in college, you meet other people who you have strong things in common with, but,
Hmm.
stronger than where you grew up. And then you start connecting with those people, but you may still keep the people that you got closer to when you discovered that you're both going to the same college from the same hometown, but you become more discerning over time about who do you want to spend your time with. But in those beginning months, it's one of the reasons why going away to college is one of the hardest experiences of a person's life,
Hmm.
and many people experience their first psychotic breaks in the first semester of going away to college.
Oh, did not know
But it's
that.
also a reason, yeah, and it's also a reason why I think it's one of the best experiences that people can have, which is it forces you to come out of your more rigid ways of being in the world and your more rigid ways of thinking. And people who you may not previously felt a strong connection with, it forces you to have an open mind about, what will make you stimulated and comfortable and find a sense of companionship and togetherness. You have to be mentally flexible, you have to be emotionally flexible. And if you are, you're going to develop connections that will help to keep you emotionally well and strong. But if you can't, if you're going to maintain rigid beliefs and rigid attitudes about things, based on any number of traits, then you may find yourself alone more often than not, and then that's going to become its own problem.
Man, that's fascinating. And like I can't help as you're telling this, kind of giving this explanation, that it's drawing me into like my own experiences from when like I was in college. And I'm thinking about like how I drew connections with other people. And a lot of it was like how like I saw connections with other people. There's one example from like when I was in college. I remember this. It was a really fascinating story. Like I was in going into math, and I can't remember what math. I think it was college algebra or like pre-calc or something like that. And I'm walking into the room, and I looked through the sea of faces, and instantly, like, I saw another black guy and was
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm gonna go there. And I think it was
Mhm.
because for me, it was like thinking when I'm seeing and I'm scanning the crowd that that's the easiest way that I can go to feel like I'm psychologically safe. So he ended up being a really close friend. He's
Yeah.
still one of my closest friends. But I was just
Oh,
thinking,
well.
wow, like how interesting is that? That like, as you were just explaining it, I was like, wow, I had an experience where like I was seeking to find connection with other people and I looked for a group commonality. Now, as I've been older, it hasn't just been based on that. Like when I was here in Chicago, I'm from Atlanta. It was through soccer. I
Mhm.
started playing soccer
Mhm.
clubs
Mhm.
and I'm a lot of my really close friends here in Chicago are because I play soccer. I'm just thinking,
Ah,
wow, like again, we go back to that benefit, which is like it's a really useful way of building connection. And if you are doing that kind of pushing yourself to be flexible and figuring out how you can make those connections, it can be really positive.
right. Yeah. And so it's this brings up a concept that I, really like talking about, and the concept is that of a shibboleth. And so first of all, let me go back to what you were talking about. So you saw this guy. He was another black guy like you. You saw, and there was um, an instant sense of this understanding that yeah, he and I, even though we don't know each other, and maybe we come from different backgrounds, different families, different
Hmm.
geographical locations, there is some aspect about being black, having black skin, that creates uh, a level of common experience
Hmm.
in America and in the world that at the very least, you share that experience in common.
Hmm.
And, he may have been, an Alabama fan, and he may
Would
have
have cut
had
that
a
short.
different.
No, I'm just joking.
That's right. Exactly. But he may have had different political beliefs than you, but that just from this phenotypic trait that at least you were going to have that sliver of experience in common. And then
Mhm.
if he was an Alabama fan, or something like that, or he had different political beliefs, then it would be up to you to say, well, if you know is he someone that I think can be a net positive to my life,
Mhm.
despite the fact that I'm going to want to kill him when Alabama plays Georgia, and maybe because we see the world differently, politically, and I invite people, at least early on in their lives, to try to be as open and flexible as possible
Mm,
around these things because they show you a different side of the cube.
mm,
If you just associate with people who think like you're only going to see this in, one side of the cube for your entire life. And you're going to lose, not only multiple perspectives, but you're going to lose the fact that life is a three-dimensional experience, not a two-dimensional experience.
mhm.
And so, you know, does he root for Georgia or who does he root for? I don't know. Your friend.
LSU, which is
LSU, all right, not quite
yeah,
as bad
yeah,
as Alabama,
yeah. But I
but
think you bring up a really good point, which is like if identifying as a part of this group, you know, um, and let's say I'm like in this group and it prevents me from being able to have connections with other people, or if it like, you start thinking about what's happening within this connection that you have, is it a net positive for you? Then that's that flexibility that you mentioned, and that gives you the ability to kind of like be able to navigate things without kind of, you know, jumping into most of the negative aspects of tribalism where like it prevents you from being able to either see all kind of the aspects of being a part of that group, but then number
Mm,
two, being able to connect with people that are outside of that group too.
right,
Yeah.
right. So there was a concept that I wanted to get back to that I was talking about before, this concept of shibboleth. And there's a
Oh yeah,
concept
yeah.
that
Sorry, we got sidetracked.
no, that's okay. Yeah, I took us off track talking about football, but um, this concept of a shibboleth comes from the Bible, the book of Judges, chapter 12. And it's a very interesting concept, not just from a biblical perspective, but really from a modern cultural perspective. And the story is that there was a battle between two tribes, the Ephraimites and the Gileadites. And the Gileadites had trounced the Ephraimites, but there were still a number of Ephraimites left over. And because of common language spoken and other phenotypical similarities, it could be difficult if you saw a random person who might look like you. They might be an Ephraimite or they might be a Gileadite, and you wouldn't know because people who grow up in the same part of the world look
Hmm.
similarly and they may speak a similar language. But sometimes there are these very subtle, minute differences that will identify you as the member of one tribe or another.
Sure.
And so the Gileadites, what they determined is that their way of pronouncing the word for heads of grain, the word is shibboleth. They pronounce it, the way that we would say it now with like an SH, shibboleth. However, the Ephraimites, in their dialect of the language, they would pronounce that same word without the H and they'd say sibboleth. And so when they came upon a random person and they didn't know if he was a member of their tribe or the other tribe, the Ephraimites,
Hmm.
they would say, okay, what do you call, the heads of grain? And if they said Sibboleth, then they would kill them on the spot.
Oh, okay.
Because they would know that they weren't a member of your tribe. But
Hmm.
if they pronounced it Shibboleth, then they would say, okay, you're one of us. And you can come be with us, even though we don't recognize you, even though we don't know who you are, we don't have your papers. You're one of us, you can be one of us,
Got it.
right? And so on some level, recognizing, this friend of yours, the LSU fan, having black skin like you, that was in and of itself a shibboleth that you were able to recognize and say, his experience in the world shares a lot, with mine.
Hmm.
Um, but there are other shibboleths around other things. Again, if you see someone with a Georgia Bulldogs jersey on, that in and of itself is a shibboleth that identifies that person as a member of your tribe,
Right,
you
right, right,
know,
right.
in that respect. And, politically, there are different shibboleths and, the TV shows that we watch and the musicians that we like and things like that. These are all cultural shibboleths that kind of identify us as being part of one tribe or another tribe or, things
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. Um, if you're a parent and you've got a teenager or a kid going off into college, how do you help build this critical eye to thinking about this kind of stuff?
Mm. Yeah, I was doing that with my daughter earlier, because adolescence is all about shifting group allegiances and
Yeah.
group memberships and things of that nature. You start off in school being close friends with the people who live on your block
Hmm.
and the people who were in your first grade class. But as you get older, those allegiances might not fit you as well because people develop different interests and they develop different um, traits and they have different hobbies that take them in different directions. And so it's hard for a teenager to have the sense of perspective of time that the groups that you're a part of today are probably going to change tomorrow. And, you may go for a period of time not being part of any group, but if you have some sort of perspective of time, helping them to understand that as time goes on, they're going to be part of many different groups. And certainly when you go to college, it's it's another great thing about college is that for the most part, everybody starts college on an even footing. You all start not knowing anybody, although some people, are traveling out of state, and they're maybe going away to school and so maybe the people who are commuting maybe have a little bit more in common at first. But by and large, people, you know, uh, going to college puts everyone on this like equal footing. And so, what do? Well, they pledge fraternities and they pledge
Hmm.
sororities,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And so that becomes a tribe, unto itself. And, my son pledged a fraternity. And, so people from the four corners of the country come together that didn't know each other and we're all I don't really know you, you don't really know me, we come from different parts of the country, we may have different political beliefs or whatever, but we're all going to stand together as teaks or as sigma pies or as this or as that,
Right.
right? And that becomes part of your allegiance. So in high school, sometimes people join clubs. There's not really fraternities and sororities in high school, but in high school they'll join clubs to try to gain that. So it's always a good idea that no matter who you are, there's a club for you in high school. And so if your child is struggling to find that sense of connection, um, just naturally amongst the peers that live closest by or anything like that, try club.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really solid, tangible idea. And like that also like connects to a lot of that literature about like having a connection to somewhere because that's really important to have as a teenager and also a young person. As an adult in general, connections are important. Yeah. Hmm. Um, it feels like we're starting to kind of get to a natural conclusion of our
Yeah.
conversation. And I like have just a couple of super curious wonderings, which is like, what are some other groups that you're a part of that enrich your life?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked. I was talking to my wife this morning and I was saying, boy, so many of the groups that I've been a part of over the years, I've
Hmm.
gotten to this point with them that, I feel like I can't in good conscience support everything that they're a part of or everything that they're doing or everything that they believe in. So gradually over time, I've kind of weakened my connection to many of the tribes that I'm a part of, whether it's
Mm,
religious or social
mm,
or political or whatever it may be. And so the interesting thing is, in my family, we're big sports fans in my family, and we follow the four major sports. But the sport that we follow closest is hockey, and we're all big New York Rangers fans. And I, was saying to my wife that I think being a Rangers fan is the only tribe now that I feel a consistent sense of connection with. It doesn't really require very much of you to be a, fan of a team, but in
hmm
our particular family, because there are multiple sports teams from New York in every sport, a lot of times, even within the same city, different members of the same family are going to root for different teams. But in both our nuclear family and in the extended family on both sides, we're all Rangers fans. So that's the tribe, ironically, that I feel the closest connection with. And all other tribes, I feel like, yeah, I can stand with you on most things, maybe even 51% of things, but that 49% that I kind of disagree with is still sizable. It's not sizable enough for me to totally sever my connection with that tribe, but it's enough for me to say, hey, I'm gonna kind of step in and step out of, this tribal membership, um, to the extent to which I can. And sometimes, that tribe will allow you to do that. And sometimes that tribe will say, well, at a certain point, you have to be all in or all out. And
mm,
then you have to make a decision, And usually when I've been pushed to make a decision like that, I've used, as much as I've not wanted to do it, I would rather be outside of a tribe that's going to force me to kind of take an all or none position on
mm,
things. And I usually value my independence and my commitment to truth as being stronger than any tribal membership.
mm. Yeah, and I think that kind of highlights what you were talking about is, being able to have a critical lens for yourself to think about what things you agree with and what things you don't is
Hmm.
very different than just taking wholesale an identity of a tribe because then, it can lead to, things as small as just like marginalizing other people and things as big as like committing like huge atrocities. If you're
Yeah,
not questioning things like that because you're people are like this is what we do and this is it and you don't question any of it. So
yeah.
I think that's pretty powerful.
Mm,
Yeah. I'll say for me, like I've kind of felt some groups that I've been a part of change over time for that very same reason. It's like, I don't completely I agree with everything, or there's like some
mhm.
things where I just disagree with very strongly. And if someone's gonna pull me into a position and be like, well, you gotta take it all, I'd be like, I'll step away. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just the
Yeah.
very nature of someone trying to push you to an all or none is in and of itself, I think, a uh, a trait that is undesirable,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
And but if I could be so bold as to ask you, what do you feel your strongest, tribal connection is?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, we spend so much time talking with students about the major markers of identity.
Hmm.
And you pull your connections to your tribes a lot of times from the idea of the identity and where you belong. I think recently in the last couple of years, a lot of it has just been based on, I want to say, trying to do research,
Mm.
um, and having some connections to different groups. So like I mentioned, I was helping out with some different projects at this consortium out of Virginia. And it's been really positive because I think it's made some really fun connections for me. And I get the opportunity to really kind of grow my knowledge base. Now, I think the cool part about that and doing a lot of research is that a lot of times you're critiquing your ideas or your guesses or your hypothesis by looking at at literature, and so
Hmm.
you're like by nature you're kind of being very critical of it, and so it's kind of fun to be in that world because I haven't always been in that. That's exciting. Yeah.
Mm,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
sounds interesting. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, yeah, and I'd love to hear more at a certain point, the work you do and the research you do. So that'll be maybe a follow-up
Yeah.
conversation sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like have to laugh because like eventually at the end of those conversations, someone's like, "So are you ready to join a doc program?" And I just laugh and say, "I don't know. I like working." And I like getting a paycheck while I'm doing it. So
Yeah,
maybe one
understood.
day we'll see what happens. Let me ask you just two questions and we can kind of wrap this
Sure.
up. Because we center this podcast on emotional wellness. What's one thing that you do that contributes to your emotional wellness?
Hmm. Um, I I meditate, and I even though from a religious perspective, I've kind of stepped away from certain tribal memberships, the
Hmm.
commitment to spirituality is something that keeps me centered. And so, it's a path that for me combines meditation with reading of um, the sacred texts of a number of different religious and spiritual groups, Hinduism, yoga, Taoism, and but certainly, Christianity and Judaism as well. And so when you read those texts, you connect with a higher level of understanding of yourself, the world, and people, and the issues that you have on a day-to-day basis get put into a larger perspective. And then the practice of meditation just, kind of helps to hit the reset button. So, that would be the thing that I would do most, I would say.
That's cool. I always like to think like, man, one day I'll be a master meditator, but then I
Mhm.
realized that would mean not being really good at
Right, right,
it.
right. Well said.
Yeah. Um, let's see. What is some ways if people had questions they had for you or if they wanted to connect and learn more about what you're researching right now, what would be some ways that people could access your stuff?
Sure. So let me just see what the best email address would be. Um, well, as you noted earlier, I have a YouTube channel, Mind Cube 3D, and so you can send an email to me there, which is mindcube3d at gmail.com. I think that's how you contacted me originally.
Probably, yeah.
Um, and so a number of my writings are on Psychology Today. The name of my blog on Psychology Today is called The Cube, so you could either Google that or just put in my name with Psychology Today. But email is usually the best way to get in touch with me. Um, and but I'm happy to connect with anyone who wants to chat more about these things. And I would perhaps when I can figure out a time and a way to do it, we can have you as a guest on MindCube 3D for a show. So
Oh,
that would be fun.
that would be cool. I'd be all on board for that. I'm sure we could have a fun topic. We'd come up with something. Last question I got for you.
Sure.
What's the next thing that you're trying to research or learn about?
Hmm. Let's see. Good question. Next thing that I'm trying to research. Um, so I work with one of the things that I've gotten into over the last few years is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So
Oh, okay.
there's a psychiatrist that I work with, and my wife works closely with, and he does ketamine treatments. He's a psychiatrist that specializes in what they call interventional psychiatry, and so he does ketamine treatments with patients who haven't responded to traditional antidepressants.
Okay.
And we've worked together over the years. We have a lot of patients in common, and so what we'll do from time to time is, and I just did one of these sessions yesterday, is we'll meet jointly with a patient, and he will administer ketamine to them, and I will do a psychotherapy session with them. Um, while they are under the effects of ketamine. And it provides a tremendously different therapy session and much more powerful. And I've had some of my more recent publications have been on the benefits of this. And so I'm looking to continue to move in this area, and eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, psilocybin is going to be FDA approved for psychiatric treatment. And I think that it actually has more potential than even ketamine. And so, I look forward on a clinical and a research level to getting more involved with that.
It's super cool. You're like on the cutting edge of trying out new research ideas. Yeah,
At
I've
least for
noticed. I've
this.
noticed it's like popped up every blue moon. I'll see an article and I'm like, I don't know anything about that. Like, I gotta sit down and talk about it one day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that again, that again could be another topic of conversation. So yeah, so that's the more recent things I've been involved in.
Well, John, I gotta say thank you for taking the time. It's Saturday. You could be watching a Rangers game right now, you know, but you're making time to be a part of this podcast. I really appreciate it and making the space to dive into some ideas. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Theo, you've made a lifelong friend, and we've, perhaps formed our own little tribe here. So,
Hey, I'm all about it. Let's do it. Somebody told me they were like, it's never a goodbye, it's always an until next time. So I like leaving it at that.
yeah, absolutely. But thank you for the opportunity to talk about all this fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this to the listeners out there that if you have ideas for future episodes that you'd like to have as a topic, please make sure you send that to me at present-mind.org. Click the podcast tab and then leave your submission there. There's also now a Instagram post, which does not have a lot of stuff on it because I'm learning how to use it. I'm an old man, but it's Talking Emotions Podcast. You can leave your comments there if there's some ideas you'd like to explore. Also, a special shout out to Palm Trees out of South Africa. And today's outro beat is DJ's Never Ending Story out of Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for the beats. Please stay creative, and thank you everyone for listening.